They thought it was a harmless hike, but every twist in this forest was a road I had paved, every dead end a trap of my own design. We arrived at the lodge on a crisp September morning in Montana. The air had that early autumn sharpness, carrying the scent of pine, damp earth, and the faint hint of wood smoke from distant cabins. I stepped out of my car, taking in the lodge, my retirement, my legacy, its stone walls glowing faintly in the diffused sunlight. Eliza, my daughter, and Hank, the caretaker, were already unpacking supplies, their laughter echoing softly, fragile against the undercurrent of tension I felt creeping in. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. That's when my eyes caught it. The gate, slightly ajar, not enough for an ordinary visitor to notice, but enough to make my gut knot. I knew every hinge, every lock. I knew it had never been left like that before. My pulse quickened, not from fear, but from recognition. This was no accident. Alex, my son-in-law, stepped forward, rubbing his hands with a practiced casualness. "Shortcut," he said, his tone light, almost too light. "We don't need to take the main trail. There sets a faster way through the North Ridge. Trust me." I knew that tone all too well. The overconfidence masking something far more sinister. Beside him, his accomplice, a distant cousin, if loyalty could even be claimed, nodded subtly, their eyes flicking toward me, betraying both hesitation and encouragement. They thought they had orchestrated a quiet plan, but the look in their eyes was a warning. I would see everything. I slipped the laminated forest map from my coat pocket. Every tree, every hidden logging trail, every ridge annotated over decades of wandering these woods. My thumb hovered over the shortcut Alex suggested. Coordinates he shouldn't have known. Paths only I had logged last winter. And yet here he was, leading us with a confidence he did not earn. The snap of a branch under Alex's boot made me flinch. Shadows shifted with the wind, leaves whispering secrets across the forest floor. I tucked the map away, letting my mind trace every possible misstep. Every sound, every subtle movement mattered. Alex's phone buzzed. He glanced down, briefly distracted. I caught the reflection, a bank alert. $28,500 transferred earlier that morning, an unauthorized withdrawal from the lodge account. My pulse quickened. That was more than greed. It was proof of intent. I kept my expression neutral, cataloging the evidence mentally. Receipts, voice memos, wire transfers, all logged, all accounted for. Eliza and Hank moved ahead, chatting about the upcoming hunting festival. Their laughter was a fragile shield against the storm brewing between Alex and me. I lagged behind intentionally, letting him lead, observing every gesture, his muttered reassurance. "He won't notice a thing," was music to my ears. I had noticed every nuance, every attempt at deception. Every small misstep was being quietly recorded in my mind, and on trail logs I kept hidden for decades. At the fork near the old cedar, a gust of wind shifted the leaves, revealing a small crumpled note. Date, September 10th. Lodge renovation expenses, $2,300, unauthorized. Small in amount, huge in implication. Someone had been meddling. This was premeditated betrayal. As we ascended the ridge, Alex moved with overconfidence. Every footfall left a trace. Every glance over his shoulder gave me insight. I had strategically placed GPS trackers along the hidden paths months ago, imperceptible, silent, reporting movement to my tablet back at the lodge. Every step he took, every deviation was tracked. Soft whispers floated just beyond earshot. "If we just get him out there, everything falls into place." Alex's co-conspirator hesitated, a flicker of conscience. But that hesitation was enough for me to recognize the depth of their guilt and my leverage. We reached a narrow clearing where the North Ridge dipped into a hidden ravine, perfect vantage point. I paused, letting them move ahead, observing. My hand brushed the leather-bound trail log in my coat. Page after page of GPS coordinates. Hunting permits, trail markers, renovation invoices. I had it all. Every single detail cataloged, ready for use. Alex's muttered, "Nothing here can go wrong," sounded hollow. I had already calculated the missteps. How the wind would carry sound, the dip in terrain where he could stumble, shadows revealing position. Even his accomplice's hesitation was a vulnerability I could exploit. Then a subtle snap echoed, a twig caught in Hank's old safety tripwire. Alex froze, momentarily startled. Perfect. The first domino had tipped. The forest itself became a mirror, reflecting greed, hubris, and inevitable exposure. Returning to the lodge, the tension thickened. Eliza's eyes sparkled with curiosity, unaware of the underlying danger. I slipped the $28,500 receipt into my drawer, underlined the date, and made a mental note to cross-check it with the lodge ledger later. Every detail mattered. Betrayal, once sown, needed to be documented, mapped, and anticipated. And then it hit me. They had underestimated me. They thought a simple shortcut, a minor misstep, could erase my presence, my legacy. But every trail, every leaf, every shadow had been anticipated. This was only the beginning. The lodge was quiet once the others had settled inside, but I could feel the tension tightening like a wire around my chest. Montana's early autumn dusk cast long shadows across the cabin floor, stretching like the fingers of someone reaching for me. Alone, I spread out the invoices, trail permits, and the GPS tracker reports on the worn oak table. Every number, every date, every subtle deviation told a story Alex didn't know I was reading. The voice memos I'd secretly recorded were chilling. His whispers captured just beyond earshot. He won't notice until it's too late. Isolate him. Make it look like an accident. I leaned back in the chair, closing my eyes for a moment, letting the rage and shock collide. My pulse thundered in my ears. Betrayal wasn't supposed to feel like this. It was supposed to be shocking, but the intimacy of it from within my own family made it visceral. I heard a faint rattling at the window, maybe the wind, maybe a branch, but I didn't move. I had learned long ago that the forest spoke if you were willing to listen. An owl called somewhere to the north, distant and lonely, a sound that set my nerves on edge. Shadows shifted across the cabin floor, curling around the corners like whispers of what could happen if I misstepped. Eliza called then, her voice cutting through the tension like a lifeline. "Dad, are you okay?" Her concern, genuine and piercing, reminded me why this wasn't just about me. This was about legacy, protection, the preservation of everything I had built. I ran through the ledger mentally, lodge income, hunting permits, renovations, every wire transfer, even the small, seemingly insignificant $28 receipt I had underlined earlier. Every detail was a weapon now. I remembered Alex's co-conspirator from earlier, the flicker of hesitation. That tiny crack in their loyalty was proof. I wasn't alone in seeing through this deception. Their guilt would be leveraged, subtly guiding them toward honesty when the time came. I pulled out the trail log again, flipping through pages of annotated GPS coordinates. September 12th, a minor deviation on the North Ridge Trail. September 14th, a detour near the hidden ravine. Each entry was a breadcrumb, a silent witness to Alex's missteps. Every trail marker, every recorded whisper, and every documented receipt fed into a mosaic of betrayal. I replayed one of the recordings again, focusing on the cadence of Alex's voice. If we just get him out there, he'll be isolated. He didn't know I could hear him, and hearing him like this, over and over, made the rage sharper, but the strategy calmer. I had to balance fury with patience. One wrong move, and the advantage slipped away. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the eaves and stirring the leaves. The forest had shifted from observer to accomplice, carrying sound, masking movements, and hiding intentions. I jotted down notes in my leather-bound journal, potential misdirections, safe paths, minor environmental triggers to unsettle him without ever breaking the law. This wasn't about cruelty. It was about justice, about safeguarding what was mine. I glanced at the lodge phone. Alex had tried calling Eliza earlier, supposedly casual check-ins, but the voicemails left a subtle trail. Dates, times, lengths, small, innocuous, but enough to verify patterns. I knew when and where he was planning his moves, and I cataloged each attempt. A sudden creak from upstairs pulled me to the present. Hank was checking the pantry. I watched the shadows dance as he passed the kitchen window. A comforting reminder that I wasn't alone. Allies mattered. Their presence grounded me in strategy, turning raw anger into actionable preparation. I closed my eyes for a moment, imagining the forest trails at dusk. Every twist and turn I had walked 1,000 times. Every hidden ravine, every fallen log, every shallow incline. Memorized, recorded, and ready. Alex thought he could manipulate these woods. But these were my streets, my alleys, my domain. He had no idea how narrow his margin for error was. A sudden thought struck me. What if Eliza could bait him unknowingly? Her phone call could act as a decoy. A casual question here, a misdirected schedule there. Every small action became a potential piece of leverage. I drafted a mental sequence, subtle nudges, timed observations, minimal exposure, but maximum effect. I sat back and let the forest hum outside the window. The distant howl of a coyote, the snapping of branches, the flutter of leaves, all underscored the unease. Shadows deepened in the corners of the cabin. They were moving, shifting, reacting as if alive. And so was I. By nightfall, I had cross-referenced every document, every receipt, every whispered plan. The evidence was irrefutable: wire transfers, invoices, trail deviations, GPS tracker logs, voice recordings, all cataloged, all precise. The betrayal was no longer a feeling. It was a series of verified facts. Eliza called again, her voice soft this time. I said, "I'm glad you're keeping everything in check, Dad. Just stay safe." I smiled, though she couldn't see it. "Always," I whispered, "always." That night, I walked the perimeter of the lodge alone. Montana's autumn air bit at my skin. Every shadow, every rustle, every flicker of movement reminded me that Alex's plan, though clever, was brittle. I could anticipate it, measure it, and counter it without ever touching a hand against him. Justice didn't need my fury, it needed my foresight. And as I watched the forest settle into darkness, a single thought anchored me: the shadows of betrayal could be dangerous, but when observed with patience, they revealed every secret. I was ready. Betrayal had settled like a weight in my chest, but by sunrise it had sharpened into something precise: strategy. I moved deliberately through the lodge office, spreading out the forest maps, trail logs, invoices, and GPS reports across the oak desk. Every page, every highlighted coordinate, every margin note was a piece of the puzzle. Alex and his accomplice had thought they could manipulate, but now these were my instruments. Hank joined me quietly, his presence steady. "He won't see it coming," he whispered, eyes scanning the meticulous arrangements. I nodded, appreciating both the loyalty and the subtle fear in his tone. He'd been around these woods far longer than anyone imagined, and his knowledge of the trails and hidden vantage points added layers to my plan. Eliza appeared then, her expression alert but calm. "Dad, I've been going through the lodge accounts," she said. "There are some unusual withdrawals. Not just the $28,500 transfer, more minor ones, small enough to seem random, but they add up." She laid out spreadsheets, marked with dates and times, cross-referenced with trail deviations from the GPS trackers. Each anomaly confirmed my suspicion. Alex had been testing boundaries, probing for weaknesses, thinking I wouldn't notice. I ran my hand across the leather-bound trail log, mentally replaying the forest paths. September 12th, minor deviation North Ridge. September 14th, ravine detour. September 16th, attempted shortcut bypass near the old cedar. I had set subtle markers during prior inspections, rocks painted on the underside, discrete sticks bent in unusual angles, tiny notches on tree bark. Nothing overt, nothing illegal, but all trackable. These micro cues would guide every movement Alex thought was hidden. Hank pointed to one trail section near the northern ridge. "If he veers off here, he'll stumble into the area you set for the first evidence drop. Receipts, logs, all verified and documented. He'll leave a trail without knowing it." I smiled. Every tiny error he made now became part of the narrative I was building. Patience was the weapon. Foresight was the shield. I recorded another voice memo into the lodge's secure system, a strategy log for myself. Cross-reference receipts with GPS deviations. Schedule micro-observations. Monitor co-conspirator hesitations. Ensure all evidence is verifiable and self-contained. It sounded cold, clinical even, but the emotions simmering beneath, Betrayal and protective instinct were anything but. Eliza and I discussed Alex's co-conspirator. They hesitate, she said quietly. I've noticed it on the calls, the texts. They're conflicted. If we approach carefully, we can guide them without confrontation. I nodded. Influence without coercion, subtle, lawful, and effective. I reviewed the voice recordings again. Alex muttering plans he believed secret, unwittingly confirming the path he intended to take. I marked each line, noting where it intersected with trail coordinates. September 18th, around 5:15 p.m., Alex mentions isolating me near the ravine. That timestamp would be critical. A moment to anchor evidence. Every whisper became a thread in the tapestry of accountability I was weaving. Hank brought up legal considerations. Property filings, affidavits, they're ready, Carlos. Once we need them, they'll support everything. GPS logs, trail markers, financial records. I appreciated the efficiency. Justice wasn't about improvisation. It was about preparation. Every document, every filing, every affidavit had to be airtight, indisputable, and timed perfectly. I mapped out the holiday dinner in my mind. Casual conversations, laughter, the subtle distraction of guests enjoying autumn fare, but beneath it all, evidence would be unveiled piece by piece. The forest, the lodge, and even the seemingly mundane ledger entries were all instruments of revelation. Every invoice, every trail deviation, every voice recording was a statement. Greed and betrayal have consequences. I paused by the window, watching the forest beyond the lodge. Shadows shifted as the wind moved through the pines. Fallen leaves drifted past, and I imagined the paths Alex would tread, oblivious to the silent witnesses I had planted. GPS trackers, subtle trail markers, logs documenting every deviation. The forest was no longer neutral. It had become my ally. Eliza touched my shoulder. You know, Dad, if we play this carefully, it's not just about exposing him. It's about showing him he can't manipulate what's rightfully ours. Her words struck a chord. Strategy and justice weren't mutually exclusive. They reinforced each other. Patience, precision, and moral clarity were the trinity guiding this orchestration. I revisited the invoices, renovations, lodge improvements, minor maintenance. I highlighted each unauthorized withdrawal, noting dates and amounts. These details, mundane in isolation, became the backbone of proof when combined with GPS logs and voice recordings. Each number, each date, each annotation would create an undeniable chain of accountability. Hank and I conducted a mock walkthrough of the forest trails that afternoon. Every bend, every ridge, every deceptive shortcut Alex might attempt was cross-checked with trail markers and previously installed GPS nodes. September 19th, 3:42 p.m. The ravine area was flagged for minor accidental evidence discovery, receipts subtly placed, logs intentionally exposed. It was subtle enough to appear coincidental, but precise enough to be undeniable in documentation. That evening, I documented everything in the lodge office. Spreadsheets, voice memos, trail logs, annotated maps, affidavits ready for notarization. Each piece was placed with foresight, ensuring continuity and verifiability. The betrayal had transformed into a tactical blueprint, methodical, lawful, and unassailable. I ended the day reviewing co-conspirator behavior. Hesitation, uncertainty, moral conflict, all were subtle levers. If approached with care, they could reinforce the strategy without direct confrontation, influence without coercion, accountability without violence. The elegance of it gave me a quiet satisfaction I hadn't expected in hours of meticulous preparation. Montana's night settled around the lodge. The forest exhaled softly, leaves rustling, shadows lengthening. Every whispered plan, every misstep, every deviation Alex had made was now catalogued, analyzed, and ready to be used as evidence. My anger had cooled into precise resolve, and the path forward was clear. Justice would arrive not with a yell, but with a demonstration of inevitability. Before I retired for the night, I reviewed the timeline. September 20th. The family would arrive for dinner. Evidence ready. GPS trackers and trail markers aligned. Financial records cross-referenced. Voice recordings secured. Co-conspirator influence mapped. every detail synchronized for the eventual reveal. Patience was my weapon, foresight my shield. Alex had no idea how tightly the web had been spun. I sat back in my chair, listening to the faint rustle of leaves and the distant call of a coyote. This blueprint of revenge wasn't just preparation, it was protection. And in that moment, I understood something vital. Justice, when executed with patience and precision, was more potent than fury. I closed my eyes, envisioning the forest trails, the lodge, the upcoming dinner, and every micro movement that would lead to the moment of reckoning. Shadows of betrayal had become instruments of revelation, and when the time came, the truth would unfold, lawful, undeniable, and perfectly timed. The forest had a way of revealing weaknesses, and by mid-morning on September 21st, Alex's overconfidence began to crack. I watched from the lodge office window as he retraced the northern ridge trail, unaware that every step was being silently logged. My GPS trackers blinked on the tablet, each dot a heartbeat, a record of a plan he thought was invisible. Hank had placed a subtle trail marker, a bent stick unremarkable to the eye at the edge of the ravine. I knew from experience that Alex would interpret it as a natural irregularity. It was enough to guide him slightly off the intended path, not dangerously, but far enough to trigger the first evidence drop. Receipts, trail logs, and the small envelope of invoices I had strategically placed weeks earlier now waited, hidden beneath the loose soil, visible only to careful observation, which he wouldn't do. As he moved forward, I noticed a misstep. His foot caught on a root just as he whispered under his breath, "Something's off." But what? The sound was almost imperceptible, but the GPS recorded the minor deviation. My heart didn't race. It thrummed with quiet satisfaction. One tiny slip, one initial error, and the chain of accountability had begun. Eliza and I observed from the lodge via remote camera. Her hand rested lightly on mine, calm yet resolute. "That's it," she whispered. "The first misstep. He doesn't even realize he's walking into his own undoing." We both knew that patience was crucial. Overreaction could ruin the delicate balance. This wasn't about vengeance through chaos. It was about systematic revelation. Hank approached with quiet concern. He almost discovered the envelope. His eyes flicked to the ravine, then back to me. But he didn't. "For now he's safe from suspicion." I nodded, appreciating both the vigilance and the subtle tension in his tone. Every movement mattered, and Hank's observation ensured no chance misstep could compromise the plan. The financial records now played a pivotal role. Minor discrepancies in lodge expenses, wire transfers to the offshore account, small cash withdrawals, all cross-referenced with trail movements. Each anomaly was a thread. Together they formed an unbroken line of proof. Alex's greed, once hidden in small increments, was now traceable, undeniable. Outside, the forest responded in its own subtle way. A sudden gust of wind carried leaves across the trail, stirring the underbrush. A distant deer call punctuated the morning stillness. These natural cues, unplanned yet perfectly timed, added an organic layer of suspense. Every sound, every shadow, every flicker in the undergrowth was a reminder that the forest was alive, and I had learned to make it part of the strategy. I reviewed the trail logs again, noting deviations: September 19th, minor misstep, North Ridge, September 21st. Route catch near ravine. September 21st, GPS tracker shows pause of 3 minutes. He was confused, momentarily unsettled. These seemingly small errors compounded, each unnoticed by him but documented, recorded, and verifiable. A voice memo played in my mind. Alex had muttered plans to isolate me, misdirect me, remove me from sight. I had documented every word. "He won't notice until it's too late." Those words now served as timestamps, proof that his intentions were premeditated. And now the first misstep had given substance to intent. Eliza and I coordinated silently. Small messages, subtle nudges through the lodge network, would guide the co-conspirator without alerting Alex. Influence without confrontation. It was delicate, but the stakes demanded precision. Miscommunication here could derail the evidence trail. Hank suggested minor environmental adjustments to reinforce the misstep. A moved branch here, a slight pile of leaves there, enough to unsettle but not alarm. Alex's overconfidence ensured he wouldn't notice. Every natural element became part of the orchestration. I reflected on the psychological impact. Alex's confidence was fragile. Even a minor error could trigger self-doubt, he muttered, trying to rationalize the misstep. And that hesitation amplified the effect of the evidence I had set. The trail markers, GPS logs, financial records, and subtle environmental cues were converging into a narrative of exposure. I documented everything meticulously: trail log updates, GPS tracker reports, invoices, placement, minor environmental cues, and recorded voice whispers. September 21st's deviations would be critical in the eventual holiday dinner reveal. The meticulous cataloging ensured that the betrayal would not be just revealed. It would be undeniable, layered with verification and continuity. By late afternoon, Alex had unknowingly walked past two additional evidence points: a crumpled receipt pinned under a loose stone and a trail log partially exposed under fallen leaves. Both were innocuous enough to seem coincidental, but in combination with the GPS data and his earlier misstep, they created a clear chain of accountability. I paused to review the overall strategy. Each act of greed Alex committed, each minor deception he attempted, was now integrated into a larger blueprint. Every environmental cue, every ledger entry, every whispered plan, every hesitation from the co-conspirator had been accounted for. Justice would unfold not in chaos, but in the elegance of inevitability. As evening approached, the forest deepened into shadows. The rustle of leaves, the faint calls of nocturnal wildlife, the distant groan of the wind across the ridge, all served as ambient reinforcement. The forest was both witness and accomplice, silent yet expressive. Every micro-movement Alex had made, every misstep he didn't realize he committed, was now part of a comprehensive dossier of proof. I reviewed the lodge's secure network, confirming GPS tracker data, trail log annotations, and financial records. September 21st was complete, documented, verified, and cross-referenced. This first misstep was a turning point. From here, every subsequent action, every planned misdirection, and every legal or environmental cue would build toward the eventual confrontation. I finally leaned back, letting the forest's deepening shadows and evening stillness settle around the lodge. The misstep had been small, almost imperceptible, but it was the opening domino. It had transformed intent into action, suspicion into verifiable evidence, and overconfidence into vulnerability. Patience, foresight, and methodical observation would now take the lead. Alex believed he was still in control, unaware that every move he made, every misstep he committed, was being quietly catalogued. Justice would not be hasty. It would be precise, inescapable, and elegantly delivered. The first misstep was complete. The blueprint was unfolding exactly as it should. By September 22nd, the forest had settled into an early autumn rhythm, leaves turning shades of amber and gold. The lodge felt almost serene from the outside, but inside the tension had sharpened like a blade. Every document, trail log, and GPS record now converged into a lattice of inevitability. Alex still believed he held the upper hand, unaware that every move, every glance, every whispered decision had been anticipated and quietly recorded. Hank and I coordinated silently. We had marked micro-misdirections along the northern ridge trail: subtly angled branches, inconspicuous leaf piles, and faintly bent saplings. Alex, in his overconfidence, would interpret these as natural anomalies, but each was designed to trigger minor errors, small deviations that would feed into the growing dossier of proof. Eliza joined us, her laptop open with the latest cross-reference of lodge financials, invoices, and trail logs. "Dad, I've flagged additional withdrawals," she said quietly, pointing at a string of dates and amounts totaling $12,400 over the past month. "He's testing limits, but every transaction lines up with trail deviations." Her calmness was precise, clinical even, and it anchored my own focus. We discussed the co-conspirator. Their hesitation was becoming more pronounced. Alex's overconfidence had amplified their guilt. Subtle nudges, small questions, indirect comments, and occasional reminders about consequences had begun to sway their behavior. Influence without coercion. Every hesitation was catalogued, a micro sign of vulnerability that could later reinforce the strategic plan. Outside, the forest murmured. A sudden gust moved leaves across the trails. A distant deer call punctuated the quiet. Snapping twigs hinted at movement. Hank had deliberately repositioned minor evidence, ensuring Alex would encounter it without realizing its significance. Nature, orchestrated with subtle human intervention, became an accomplice in documenting betrayal. The morning's strategy review focused on the ravine near the northern ridge. September 19th, misstep noted. September 21st, small deviation recorded. September 22nd, preparatory evidence placed. Receipts partially exposed under leaf litter. Trail logs subtly visible. GPS trackers silently reporting. Alex's sequence of errors was becoming a pattern, a chain of accountability. I checked the financial ledger again. Unauthorized withdrawals, wire transfers to offshore accounts, minor cash anomalies, all meticulously cross-referenced with trail deviations and recorded whispers. Each number reinforced the growing narrative. Alex's intent was clear, verifiable, and now unavoidable. Hank suggested a final touch, moving a small envelope containing trail logs and additional invoices to a subtly exposed location along the next ridge path. "It'll look accidental," he said, "but it will be the third documented misstep." I agreed. Timing was critical. Each piece of evidence needed to reinforce the prior and foreshadow the forthcoming confrontation. By midday, Alex had unknowingly triggered two additional evidence points. First, he brushed against a concealed envelope, misaligning a few papers but leaving them in plain sight. Later, a GPS tracker reported a pause as he inspected an unremarkable section of trail. Both actions seemed minor to him, but to me they were pivotal. They transformed intent into recorded action. I reviewed voice recordings again. Alex muttered plans aloud, unaware of how meticulously I had documented his words. "We just need him isolated. He'll never know until it's too late." Those recordings were now timestamps, verified proof of premeditation, combined with his financial deviations, trail missteps, and environmental triggers. They formed an airtight record of both intent and opportunity. Eliza and I conducted a micro-simulation of the holiday dinner reveal, laying out seating arrangements, timing of conversations, and evidence placement. We ensured each revelation would appear natural, sequential, and undeniable. The forest trails, lodge layout, and ledger entries were all elements in the choreography. Every shadow, rustle, and whispered movement had been accounted for. Hank added a subtle layer of auditory cues. Small wind chimes strategically placed along the porch, a faint creak in the lodge floorboards, and carefully timed branch rustlings would serve as micro-suspense triggers during the reveal. Each sound would reinforce tension, making the evidence impossible to ignore. By afternoon, all elements aligned. Co-conspirator behavior had shifted slightly. Hesitation, guilt, uncertainty, a micro-crack that could be leveraged. Alex remained oblivious, convinced of his own cleverness. Every misstep, every overlooked detail, every recorded whisper reinforced the truth he would soon face. I revisited the trail logs and invoices one final time. Receipts, GPS coordinates, financial anomalies, and recorded whispers formed a continuous verifiable chain, each element independently significant, together unassailable. Alex's overconfidence had become his liability. The forest, the lodge, and the carefully orchestrated evidence had become my instruments. Evening settled over the lodge, amber sunlight filtering through the pines. I paused at the window, observing the forest as it prepared for night. The subtle movement of leaves, the distant calls of wildlife, the shifting shadows, all now part of the blueprint. The chessboard had been set, pieces moved, traps positioned. Alex was unaware he was already surrounded. I sat back with Eliza and Hank, reviewing final contingencies. If Alex deviated unexpectedly, minor trail markers could correct his course, leading him to additional evidence points without revealing intentionality. Each action had a countermeasure, every possible variable accounted for, methodical, precise, and completely lawful. By nightfall, the first three missteps, combined with ledger anomalies, environmental cues, and co-conspirator hesitation, had created a clear, unbroken chain of accountability. Alex's pattern of greed and deception was no longer hypothetical. It was documented, verified, and strategically exploitable. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the forest wind stir outside. The rustle of leaves and the faint distant call of a coyote underscored the quiet power of preparation. Justice didn't need to be loud, it only needed to be inevitable. The chessboard had been tightened, every piece in position, and the next act, the gathering storm, would unfold exactly as designed. Patience had transformed betrayal into opportunity. Every minor misstep, every hesitation, every shadow had been accounted for. The plan was flawless, the strategy unassailable, and the path toward public revelation entirely set. September 23rd dawned crisp and golden over Montana, the lodge surrounded by a forest dressed in early autumn splendor. Leaves rustled softly in the wind, their amber and gold hues reflecting the sunlight like scattered embers. From the outside it all looked peaceful, but inside tension simmered like a coiled spring. Today was critical. Every previous misstep, every ledger entry, every trail marker, and every micro-deviation would converge into the next stage of revelation. I monitored the GPS trackers while sipping black coffee, my eyes tracing Alex's path through the northern ridge. Every step he took was logged, time-stamped, cross-referenced with prior deviations and recorded whispers. He moved cautiously, unaware that the forest itself was recording his overconfidence, every pause a breadcrumb leading to his undoing. Eliza entered quietly, her laptop open, showing cross-referenced financial anomalies and trail missteps. "Dad, he's starting to notice small inconsistencies," she whispered. "The first hesitation when he paused near the ravine. That's what will make him doubt himself." I nodded. Alex's ego was brittle, and small disruptions could amplify his anxiety exponentially. Each micro moment was now critical evidence for the eventual showdown. Hank adjusted one of the environmental cues. A pile of leaves slightly shifted, exposing a trail log and invoice, innocuous to the untrained eye, but perfectly positioned to trigger observation. "He'll notice eventually, and it will be too late," Hank said, a subtle pride in his voice. The forest, for all its beauty, had become a silent ally. Every snapping twig, every gust of wind, every shadow was now part of a system designed to record betrayal in action. As Alex moved along the ridge, I noted additional deviations in the trail logs. September 22nd, minor pause near a hidden ravine. September 23rd, slight veer north of the main trail. Each misstep, recorded through GPS, created a perfect chain linking his intent to his actions. It was meticulous, methodical, and fully verifiable. I reviewed voice recordings again. Alex muttering plans he thought secret. If he just follows the path, he'll be isolated. He won't see it coming. Every syllable was time-stamped, cataloged, and mapped to trail deviations. His words, combined with financial anomalies, trail missteps, and environmental cues, formed a comprehensive record, impossible to dispute. Eliza and I coordinated subtle co-conspirator influence. The hesitation in their calls, the micro pauses in texts, the slight uncertainty in tone, all became tools. Gentle nudges, indirect questions, and casual reminders were enough to reinforce honesty without alerting Alex. Influence without confrontation, guiding outcomes without manipulation, became a critical advantage. Outside, the forest murmured with life. The wind carried leaves, the distant coyote called, and shadows stretched along the trail. Every natural sound enhanced the tension, creating an auditory backdrop that mirrored the subtle orchestration of justice unfolding. The forest itself was alive with cues silently emphasizing Alex's miscalculations. By late morning, Alex encountered two additional evidence points: a partially exposed invoice tucked beneath a leaf and a GPS tracker signal that marked a slight pause near a bend in the trail. Both appeared coincidental to him, but in reality they were integral to the dossier of proof being built. The subtle orchestration of these missteps was a dance of strategy, patience, and lawfulness. I reviewed the ledger meticulously: unauthorized withdrawals, minor cash anomalies, wire transfers, and trail deviations, all documented and cross-referenced with timestamps and voice recordings. Each piece reinforced the narrative of intent in action. Alex's attempts to manipulate events had now become evidence of his own undoing. Hank suggested final adjustments, repositioning a subtle branch to nudge Alex toward a partially exposed trail log, adjusting leaves to create a faint visual cue, and ensuring auditory triggers, a faint creak in a distant tree. The soft rustle of leaves were aligned with his path. These micro-adjustments would guide him without overt interference, maintaining plausible deniability while ensuring accountability. Eliza and I reviewed the holiday dinner logistics. Casual conversations, laughter, and staged curiosity would mask the reveal. Seating arrangements, timing of discussions, and placement of documents ensured that evidence would be unveiled gradually, naturally, and undeniably. Each element, from forest trails to lodge layout, was part of a coordinated orchestration designed to expose greed and premeditation without theatrical exaggeration. By mid-afternoon, minor confrontations had begun. Alex noticed small inconsistencies, a shifted trail marker, a partially exposed receipt. His muttered frustration, "Something's off," was faint but audible. These small cracks, coupled with GPS logs and documented financial anomalies, amplified tension and set the stage for the eventual confrontation. Every moment of doubt he experienced now fed into a chain of irrefutable proof. Hank and I conducted one final walkthrough of the trails. Every ridge, every bend, every inconspicuous marker was verified. Receipts, invoices, trail logs, and GPS trackers were all aligned. Any deviation Alex might take had contingency adjustments ready, natural triggers and environmental cues were all mapped. The orchestration was complete. By evening, the forest had darkened, shadows lengthening, winds stirring leaves. The lodge, silent from the outside, hid a carefully calibrated network of evidence, observation points, and psychological cues. Every misstep Alex had made, every hesitation of the co-conspirator, every environmental cue, and every financial anomaly had been meticulously catalogued. The gathering storm was complete. I reviewed the final chain of accountability. September 19th deviation. September 21st, first misstep. September 22nd, ledger anomalies. September 23rd, environmental triggers and micro-errors. Every detail converged into an unbroken narrative, irrefutable and legally verifiable. Justice no longer required confrontation. It would unfold with precision and inevitability. As night fell, the autumn wind rustled through the pines. The distant howl of a coyote echoed across the ridge. Shadows of betrayal, missteps, and unobserved greed had been catalogued and aligned. Alex remained unaware, confident in his manipulation, blind to the network of evidence now silently encompassing him. I leaned back, letting the forest's ambient whispers settle around me. Patience, foresight, and strategic preparation had transformed betrayal into inevitability. The gathering storm was ready, and the holiday dinner, the public, elegant revelation, would be the final act. The chessboard was set, every piece perfectly positioned. Alex had no idea how narrow his margin for error had become. The forest exhaled gently, as if acknowledging the meticulous orchestration within it. Every leaf, shadow, and sound had become part of the evidence, part of the strategy, part of the inevitability. And when the storm broke, justice would arrive, not through fury, but through the careful, inevitable convergence of foresight, preparation, and lawfully orchestrated revelation. September 24th arrived with a golden light spilling across the lodge and forest. Autumn had claimed its colors, amber, rust, and gold glittered through the pines. From outside, the lodge looked serene, welcoming. Inside, tension buzzed under the surface, as palpable as the scent of roasted venison and apple cider. Today was the culmination of every misstep, every trail log, every whispered plan, every ledger entry. Today, the truth would be undeniable. Guests began arriving just past noon. Family, friends, and a few neighbors from nearby Montana towns greeted each other casually. Laughter and chatter masked the meticulous orchestration unfolding quietly beneath the surface. Alex moved through the crowd, confident in his cleverness, unaware of the silent network of evidence meticulously compiled to reveal his deception. Eliza guided him to the dining table, positioning him strategically near the center where the unfolding evidence would converge. Hank moved discreetly, checking minor cues, subtle leaf arrangements, faintly bent saplings visible through the windows, and carefully placed trail logs in decorative folders on the sideboard. The forest itself, visible through expansive lodge windows, acted as a backdrop to the suspense, every rustle of leaves and shadow a silent accomplice to the eventual revelation. I welcomed guests warmly, careful to maintain a casual demeanor. "I thought we'd share a story today," I said, glancing around the table, "a tale about getting lost and finding our way again." The subtle irony was not lost on Alex, though he tried to mask it with forced laughter. Conversation flowed light and casual, while I allowed the previous day's preparations to come into play. Receipts, invoices, trail logs, and GPS printouts had been placed carefully along the table, disguised as notes for lodge maintenance discussions. Alex, naturally inquisitive, began inspecting these items, unaware that each observation would reinforce the chain of evidence. I began casually recounting previous hunting season excursions, weaving subtle references to trail deviations and navigation challenges. "Remember the North Ridge Trail?" I asked aloud. It seemed so simple, but even seasoned guides can misstep if they overlook the markers we set years ago. Alex shifted slightly in his seat, a small furrow in his brow. He didn't realize he was already implicated in the narrative. Eliza joined, reinforcing the dialogue with data. "Actually, Dad, we logged some interesting GPS readings last week," she said, gesturing to the annotated maps. "There were a few unexpected pauses and diversions, completely harmless on their own, but patterns emerge when you overlay them with financial records." She laid out spreadsheets cross-referencing each trail deviation with wire transfers and minor unauthorized withdrawals. Alex's confident mask faltered for just a moment. He reached for a trail log casually placed on the sideboard. But I anticipated this. The log contained a partially exposed envelope of invoices and GPS summaries, visible but unobtrusive. His hand brushed the envelope. A small slip of paper fell, caught subtly by Hank's shoe, drawing attention without dramatics. Guests' eyes followed the movement. Alex's heart rate picked up. He didn't realize every movement was now observable and verifiable. I leaned forward, voice calm, conversational. "Funny thing about trails," I said. "You think you know the way. But one misstep, even a small one, can unravel everything. Sometimes the evidence is right under your feet, waiting to be noticed." A faint rustle from the window aligned perfectly with the moment, as if the forest itself punctuated my words. Eliza gestured subtly to the ledger, now open with financial anomalies highlighted. "It's remarkable," she added, "how small deviations can reveal patterns, even unintentional ones." Alex shifted uncomfortably, glancing around, realizing that casual glances, minor observations, and micro-errors had built a web he could not escape. Hank whispered to me under the table. "He's starting to notice the connections." I nodded. That micro-suspense, the subtle recognition of pattern without immediate understanding, was crucial. The unfolding realization would amplify the emotional and psychological impact of the revelation. I allowed the conversation to progress naturally while letting evidence speak for itself. Receipts fell out of folders subtly. Maps had been rotated for casual inspection, and GPS logs were visible on tablets placed inconspicuously around the room. Each element corroborated the other. Trail deviations, financial anomalies, and recorded whispers aligned perfectly. Alex's mask cracked further when a minor discrepancy in the invoices caught his attention. "Wait, these transfers, they're connected to the trail logs?" His voice wavered slightly. The silence that followed was punctuated only by distant bird calls from the forest, the soft hum of the lodge's ventilation, and the faint rustling of leaves against windows. I leaned in, calm, measured. "I think you underestimated me," I said quietly. Just enough for him to hear. "Every path, every deviation, every minor action has been accounted for. Every misstep recorded, every whispered plan noted. It's all here." I gestured subtly to the array of evidence on the table and sideboard. Guests began to observe more closely. They noticed partially exposed receipts, trail logs, and GPS readings. Subtle annotations became apparent. Alex's eyes darted between elements he now recognized as interlinked. His co-conspirator shifted uneasily, guilt and fear now visible. Every hesitation, every micro-movement was now amplified. I continued, voice calm, deliberate. This lodge, these trails, they scepter my legacy. And like any legacy, they can be manipulated without consequence. Every deviation, every small misstep, every act of greed leaves a mark, and every mark is accounted for. Alex reached for a document, hands slightly trembling, but it was too late. The envelope of invoices and GPS summaries had been strategically secured. He could touch it, but the chain of evidence was already visible to all. Micro-suspense peaked as his overconfidence collapsed under the weight of verifiable truth. Eliza added, quietly but firmly, everything he tried to conceal has been documented, time-stamped, and cross-referenced. It's all here. She gestured to the combined evidence, financial records, trail logs, GPS data, voice recordings. The narrative was airtight, undeniable, and visually reinforced for the audience of family and guests. Alex's face drained of color. His whispered protests were inaudible to anyone but himself. I let silence dominate, letting the weight of accumulated evidence settle into the room. Every guest understood something had shifted. The dynamics, the trust, the balance of control. I concluded the reveal with measured reflection. Justice isn't about fury. I said it's about inevitability, and when betrayal is methodical, precise, and documented, it cannot hide. It only exposes itself. In time, in evidence, in truth. A faint wind stirred the lodge curtains, echoing the collapse of his carefully constructed confidence. Hank and Eliza exchanged subtle glances. The co-conspirators' hesitation had tipped fully into acknowledgement. Loyalty realigned with the truth. Alex sat frozen, the elegance of exposure unfolding around him. The forest outside, the lodge, and the meticulously curated chain of proof had transformed his overconfidence into undeniable accountability. By the time dinner concluded, the outcome was clear. The evidence had been revealed elegantly, publicly, and lawfully. No theatrics, no exaggeration, just methodical, patient, and unavoidable truth. Every micro-misdirection, every trail deviation, every financial discrepancy, every recorded whisper had culminated in a flawless revelation. The autumn evening settled over the lodge, leaves rustling softly against the windows. The holiday dinner had ended, but the storm of exposure had reached its peak. Alex's overconfidence had been dismantled with precision, patience, and strategy. The chessboard was complete. Every piece had fallen exactly where it needed to. Justice lawfully and elegantly had been delivered. The morning after the holiday dinner, the lodge felt unusually still. Autumn sunlight filtered softly through the pines, painting the floors in amber streaks. The forest exhaled quietly, leaves rustling like whispered confidences. Inside, I walked through the main hall, surveying the aftermath of the previous evening. Alex's plan had collapsed with quiet precision, and now the focus shifted to restoration of the lodge, of trust and of order. Eliza moved among the tables, gathering documents, receipts, and trail logs that had been partially exposed during the reveal. Everything's intact, Dad, she said calmly. All the evidence, all the documentation, we're completely prepared if legal follow-up is required. Her voice carried a quiet strength that steadied me. Each ledger entry, each GPS record, each voice memo remained perfectly aligned, ready to reinforce the truth if needed. Hank was checking minor repairs around the lodge, replacing displaced trail markers and restoring subtle environmental cues. It's all secure, he said, glancing up. Nothing can be questioned, everything aligns. His meticulous attention to detail had been crucial throughout, and now his validation offered reassurance. I walked to the lodge office, reviewing the financial ledger once more. Unauthorized withdrawals, minor anomalies, and wire transfers, all now documented, cross-referenced with trail deviations and voice recordings. Every micro-misdirection Alex attempted had become part of a larger narrative. The betrayal had been exposed without the need for confrontation beyond the evidence itself. Outside, the forest seemed to calm. A gentle wind carried the scent of pine and damp earth. Leaves fell softly along the paths, tracing quiet patterns across the trails. Alex had once attempted to manipulate. I paused at a window, watching the sunlight shift through the trees. Each branch, each shadow, each subtle movement seemed to echo the precision of the orchestration we had set in motion. Eliza joined me at the window. The co-conspirator reached out, she said softly. They acknowledged their part. Morally, they've reconciled. There's no more deception. Her words brought a subtle sense of closure. Even those who had wavered now understood the truth, the inevitability of accountability, and the importance of integrity. I revisited the trail logs and GPS tracker data. September 19th, minor deviation noted. September 21st, first misstep documented. September 22nd, ledger anomalies aligned. September 23rd, environmental cues triggered as planned. September 24th, public revelation executed. Every step, every misstep, every hesitation was now a verified piece of evidence, forming a continuous, unbroken chain. Hank approached, carrying a folder of invoices and maps that had been part of the reveal. These are all in order, he said. Verified and ready for any official proceedings. Everything's documented. I nodded, appreciating both his diligence and the reassurance it provided. Every detail had been accounted for, ensuring that Alex's accountability was not only public but legally reinforced. I walked through the lodge corridors, observing the subtle restoration of normalcy. Furniture repositioned, trail markers restored, windows cleaned, and minor repairs completed. The lodge was returning to a state of calm, reflecting not just physical order but the restoration of trust and clarity. Each detail of the environment, like the forest beyond, now mirrored the equilibrium I had worked to achieve. Eliza and I reviewed the financial documentation one last time. Every unauthorized transaction had been logged, verified, and cross-referenced with trail movements and recorded whispers. Each ledger entry reinforced the narrative established the night before. Justice, methodical and precise, had been delivered without chaos, only through patience, foresight, and careful orchestration. I reflected on the emotional arc of the past days. The betrayal had cut deeply, but methodical planning and strategic patience had transformed it into actionable justice. The lodge, my legacy, and the integrity of my family's trust had been safeguarded. Every minor misstep, every subtle hesitation, and every environmental cue had served its purpose. By late afternoon, the lodge had settled into a quiet rhythm. Guests had departed, leaving the forest and lodge to themselves. Leaves rustled along the trails, wind whispered through the pines, and the air carried the faint scent of smoke from distant chimneys. The calm was restorative, signaling both resolution and continuity. Eliza approached, holding the trail logs and invoices. It's complete, she said. Everything verified, everything documented. No ambiguity, no loose ends. Her tone was calm, resolute, and quietly triumphant. The orchestration of justice had reached its natural conclusion. I walked to the veranda, watching the forest stretch into the fading light. The trees seemed to shimmer, amber leaves falling in slow arcs. Each subtle environmental cue I had employed, micro misdirections, strategically placed evidence, faint auditory triggers, was now part of a complete harmonious system. The betrayal had been exposed without cruelty, the lodge preserved, and the moral integrity of our family reinforced. Hank joined me, leaning lightly on the railing. It's all secure, Carlos. The evidence, the trail, the ledger, everything is airtight. And emotionally, everyone's stabilized. Even the co-conspirator has reconciled. His quiet observation was a subtle validation of the orchestration's success. I nodded, absorbing the calm. The forest whispered through the pines, distant wildlife moving unseen. Every step Alex had taken, every misstep, every deviation, every hesitation had culminated in this quiet resolution. Justice had arrived, precise, lawful, and elegantly executed. As the evening shadows lengthened, I felt a sense of closure. The betrayal had been documented, the lodge secured, and the forest had witnessed every step. The meticulous planning, patience, and moral consideration ensured that the outcome was not only inevitable but just. I turned to Eliza and Hank. This lodge, these trails, our family sips trust. They sip are safe. The betrayal has been revealed, but without cruelty. That sips the true measure of justice. The forest winds sighed gently, carrying away tension and leaving a profound, quiet autumn sunlight faded, shadows lengthened, and the lodge, once a stage for deception, now reflected balance restored. The ashes of betrayal had settled, leaving clarity, peace, and validated accountability. The morning after the holiday dinner, the lodge exuded a serene calm, almost deceptive in its stillness. Montana's autumn air carried a crispness that hinted at the coming frost, while sunlight filtered through the pines, casting a mosaic of shadows across the floors. The forest outside seemed to hum gently, leaves rustling as if acknowledging the resolution quietly settling in. Alex had retreated, his presence reduced to whispers of tension that lingered only in memory. The co-conspirator had accepted responsibility, acknowledging every misstep and confirming the authenticity of the documented evidence. The ledger, GPS records, trail logs, and invoices, all meticulously cross-referenced, left no room for dispute. Justice, methodical and precise, had been quietly delivered. Eliza walked alongside me, her steps soft on the hardwood floors. "Dad," she said, her voice calm, "all the evidence is in order. The bank transactions, trail deviations, voice recordings, everything is documented for legal purposes. Even if there were challenges, it would hold up." Her confidence, tempered by care, mirrored my own. Every detail had been accounted for, leaving Alex's deception irreproachable and exposed. Hank moved quietly through the lodge, ensuring minor details were corrected, displaced trail markers restored, invoices organized, and subtle environmental cues returned to their natural positions. "Everything aligns now," he said, his eyes scanning the room with satisfaction. "It's airtight, and emotionally. The lodge has returned to balance." His careful observation reassured me. Every element of the plan had concluded with precision, leaving no loose ends. I reviewed the ledger one last time. Unauthorized withdrawals, wire transfers, minor cache anomalies, and trail deviations, each matched with GPS records and voice recordings. Every element intersected perfectly, a web of evidence confirming the premeditation and greed that had fueled Alex's attempts to manipulate the lodge and the family. The chain of accountability was complete, lawfully documented, and indisputable. Outside, the forest exhaled softly, leaves rustling and small animals moving unseen among the pines. The natural environment, which had silently mirrored and reinforced the orchestration, now contributed to a sense of quiet vindication. Every misstep Alex had taken, every hesitation of the co-conspirator, every subtle cue placed along trails, these micro-elements had culminated in the evidence I now held, undeniable and verified. I walked to the lodge veranda, watching the soft sway of trees in the breeze. Each shadow, each rustle, each flicker of movement recalled the orchestration of the previous days. Minor deviations, trail missteps, environmental cues, financial discrepancies, all aligned into a coherent narrative. Justice had been achieved, not with confrontation, but with foresight, patience, and meticulous planning. Eliza joined me, holding the leather-bound trail log and folders containing invoices and GPS summaries. "It's complete," she said softly. "All verified. No ambiguity. Everything's documented for the record, both legally and for clarity." Her tone carried calm authority, reflecting the precision of the orchestration and the inevitability of the outcome. Hank stood nearby, surveying the lodge and the forest beyond. "Even the co-conspirator acknowledges their role," he said. "Morally and factually, everything is resolved. No loose ends, every path, every deviation, every micro-misdirection has been accounted for." His words reinforced the finality of the orchestration. Accountability had been secured, ethically and lawfully. I reflected on the psychological impact. Alex's overconfidence had unraveled quietly, elegantly, leaving him exposed without spectacle. The lodge, the trails, and the meticulously documented evidence had demonstrated that deception, when paired with greed, could not withstand patient observation and methodical countermeasures. Every ledger entry, GPS log, trail deviation, and recorded whisper was a testament to foresight and justice. By late morning, the lodge operated with renewed calm. Tasks that had been disrupted during the revelation were restored. Trail markers repositioned, minor repairs completed, and environmental cues returned to their natural state. The lodge reflected balance not just in structure but in trust and integrity. The orchestration of justice had concluded, leaving the physical and moral order intact. I paused at the window, watching amber leaves drift gently across the forest floor. The breeze carried the soft scent of pine and damp earth. Every misstep, every deviation, every hesitation had contributed to a narrative that would withstand scrutiny, both legally and socially. The lodge, my legacy, and the family's trust had been safeguarded. Justice had arrived, quietly but unmistakably. Eliza's voice broke my reflection. Dad, even publicly, everything is settled. The lodge's reputation is intact, assets secured and accountability reinforced. No one can dispute the sequence of events now. Her calm assurance reminded me that patience and meticulous preparation had transformed betrayal into an irrefutable record. I walked slowly through the corridors of the lodge, observing the restored order. Everything aligned: trail logs, invoices, financial records, and environmental cues, all now integrated into a coherent, documented, and verifiable system. Even the forest outside seemed to acknowledge the restoration, its shadows dancing lightly on the walls. Hank approached with the final folder of evidence. Every document, every GPS entry, every ledger line, complete, he said. If any formal follow-up is needed, we are entirely prepared. And emotionally, everyone is stable. His measured tone underscored the thoroughness of the orchestration. I took a deep breath, absorbing the quiet. The betrayal had been exposed, accountability enforced, and the lodge restored. Every detail had been anticipated, every micro misdirection executed, every shadow, sound, and trail deviation leveraged. Justice had arrived, not through confrontation or fury, but through foresight, patience, and precision. Finally, I spoke quietly, almost to myself. The forest, the lodge, and our family SIP's trust, they SIPs are safe. The betrayal has been revealed, but without cruelty. That is the true measure of justice. The wind whispered through the pines, distant bird calls punctuating the silence. Every shadow, every micro detail, every evidence point had contributed to this quiet resolution. The chessboard had been arranged, the pieces fallen perfectly, and the outcome ensured. Justice had been achieved in quiet, lawful, and elegant fashion. September 25th dawned with a gentle golden light spilling across the lodge and forest. The autumn air was crisp, scented with pine and earth, carrying a subtle chill that hinted at the coming frost. Mist hovered lightly over the trails, curling between the trunks of the tall pines, creating the illusion of movement in the stillness. I stepped onto the veranda, taking in the quiet serenity that now embraced the lodge. After the storm of the previous days, the forest seemed to exhale. Each leaf shimmered, every shadow moved slowly across the forest floor, and the distant call of a hawk echoed across the ridge. It was a calm unlike any I had experienced in years, an audible reward for patience, planning, and foresight. Every misstep, every ledger entry, every trail deviation that Alex had unknowingly committed now existed only in documentation and memory. I walked along the main trail, boots crunching softly on fallen leaves. Each step was familiar, yet today carried a sense of reflection, a reminder of the careful orchestration that had unfolded. GPS markers I had placed months earlier blinked quietly in my mind's eye, each a note in the symphony of justice. Receipts, invoices, voice recordings, and trail deviations all aligned perfectly. Every element had contributed to the inevitable resolution. Eliza joined me, walking slowly beside me. "Dad," she said, her voice calm, "it's quiet now. Everything is settled. Financials, trails, evidence. The co-conspirator has reconciled. Even Alex, he's gone. His pattern of deceit exposed." Her eyes scanned the forest, noting subtle shifts in light and shadow. Calm clarity had returned, and with it a profound sense of justice. I paused by a cluster of pines, their branches whispering in the gentle wind. The forest had borne witness to every step, every misstep, every hidden action, and every subtle hesitation. Each movement Alex had made, every error, every pause had been silently recorded, catalogued, and transformed into verifiable proof. The betrayal had been exposed, but without cruelty, careful, lawful, and precise. Hank appeared along the path, carrying the leather-bound trail log and folders containing invoices and GPS summaries. "Everything is documented," he said softly. "If anyone questions the events, the record is unassailable. Legally and morally, every piece aligns." I nodded, appreciating the depth of his diligence and the reassurance it provided. The orchestration of justice was complete. I traced my fingers over the trail logs, recalling the sequence of events: September 19th, minor deviation; September 21st, first misstep; September 22nd, ledger anomalies; September 23rd, environmental triggers; September 24th, public revelation. Every detail had been observed, recorded, and verified. The chain of accountability was continuous, clear, and undeniable. Eliza and I walked further, the forest canopy filtering sunlight into moving patterns across the trail. "It's remarkable," she said quietly. "The way everything aligned, the forest, the lodge, the ledger, every micro deviation contributed to a larger truth. Nothing was left to chance." Her words reflected the meticulous orchestration that had turned betrayal into documented justice. I recalled Alex's overconfidence, his subtle manipulations, and the minor errors that had accumulated into a comprehensive chain of evidence. Each whispered plan, every hesitation of the co-conspirator, every financial anomaly, and every trail misstep had built toward this quiet morning among the pines. The strategy had not only exposed betrayal, but reinforced the moral integrity of our family and lodge. Stopping at a small clearing, I looked back at the lodge, sunlight warming its stone walls. The forest around it, once a backdrop for manipulation, had become a silent accomplice in revealing truth. Branches, leaves, shadows, and ambient sounds, all aligned with subtlety to document, guide, and expose. The orchestration was elegant, lawful, and unassailable. Hank rested nearby, quietly observing. "The co-conspirator has acknowledged everything," he said. "Morally and factually, all is resolved. Even the trails have returned to order. There is no ambiguity." His measured tone reinforced the depth of planning and precision involved. Every detail, every nuance had been anticipated and accounted for. I breathed deeply, inhaling the crisp morning air, the faint scent of pine, damp earth, and the subtle smoke from distant chimneys. Every element, the forest, the lodge, the evidence, the co-conspirator's acknowledgement, had been orchestrated to achieve justice without chaos, without cruelty, and with complete inevitability. Eliza looked at me, her expression serene. "Dad, you did it. Justice without spectacle, truth without cruelty. The lodge, our family's legacy, it's intact. Everything is aligned." Her affirmation reinforced the sense of calm achievement that now pervaded the forest and lodge. I stepped further along the trail, boots crunching softly on leaves. The sun climbed higher, shadows stretching slowly. Each micro step I took reminded me of the precision required to orchestrate the previous days. Micro misdirections, environmental cues, GPS tracker placements, ledger entries, and voice recordings all had contributed to exposing betrayal while preserving integrity. Stopping beneath a tall pine, I closed my eyes. The wind whispered through the branches, distant birds called, and the forest itself seemed to exhale in acknowledgement. I reflected on the lessons learned. Patience, foresight, and strategic observation were more powerful than impulsive reaction. Justice could be precise, elegant, and undeniable without cruelty. Opening my eyes, I looked at Eliza and Hank. "You didn't lose me," I said softly, voice carrying over the still morning. "You gave me away." The aphorism echoed, capturing the essence of betrayal, foresight, and ultimate justice. Every act, every decision, and every preparation had led to this clarity, this moment of reflective closure. We continued along the trail, each step measured, observing the interplay of sunlight and shadow across the forest floor. Leaves drifted past like quiet witnesses, branches swayed gently, and the air carried a sense of calm completion. The orchestration of betrayal, revelation, and justice had reached its natural conclusion. By mid-morning, the lodge and forest had settled into a rhythm of peaceful normalcy. Every document, trail log, GPS record, and invoice was in order, verified, and securely archived. Alex's overconfidence, greed, and deception were fully exposed. The co-conspirator had reconciled morally. The lodge's legacy and family trust were preserved. The morning among the pines had become a testament. Justice delivered through patience, foresight, and methodical orchestration is more enduring than fury. Shadows of betrayal had been transformed into a narrative of clarity, accountability, and moral equilibrium. The lodge settled into a gentle rhythm, the air crisp with early autumn. Leaves drifted lazily across the trails, sunlight filtering through amber and gold canopies. The forest, once a silent witness to deception, now hummed quietly in approval, its whispers carrying the soft rustle of resolution. Alex's presence had vanished, his miscalculations and greed fully exposed. The co-conspirator had reconciled morally, acknowledging their role and embracing honesty. The lodge's legacy, meticulously documented through trail logs, GPS coordinates, financial records, and voice recordings, remained intact, fully verifiable, and unchallenged. Eliza moved among the restored trails and interiors, ensuring invoices, receipts, and ledger entries were properly filed. Hank adjusted minor trail markers and environmental cues, returning the forest and lodge to their natural equilibrium. Every micro detail, shadow, sound, document was now aligned. I paused on the veranda, watching sunlight dance through the pines. The rustle of leaves, distant bird calls, and the soft whisper of wind through the forest mirrored the lodge's restored balance. Justice had arrived, methodical and elegant, leaving clarity in place of deception, accountability in place of greed, and serenity where shadows of betrayal once lingered. The autumn aftermath was complete. The forest was quiet, a stillness that seemed almost deliberate, as if every tree and shadow understood the resolution of the past days. Leaves drifted lazily along the trails, sunlight piercing through gaps in the canopy, illuminating paths Alex had once sought to manipulate. The lodge stood serene, its stone walls warmed by soft autumn light. A new visitor arrived unexpectedly, curious about the trails and lodge history. As they wandered near the northern ridge, a subtle trail marker strategically placed months prior caught their eye. They paused, studying the small notch in the tree and the faint arrangement of leaves beneath it. A slight smile crossed my face. Even minor details had continued to guide the forest narrative, a silent testament to oversight and foresight. From a distance, I observed Alex, defeated and distant, witnessing the subtle, almost symbolic reinforcement of control. His errors and missteps remained permanently documented, the ledger of his greed and overconfidence visible in evidence he could neither erase nor ignore. The wind rustled through the pines, snapping twigs softly beneath unseen feet. Every step along the trail whispered accountability and inevitability. The forest, the lodge, the evidence, and the subtle markers had completed their work. Justice was done, silent, lawful, and elegantly irreversible. The last twist of the trail had unfolded.